Just it might help you to listen to it later to remember what I said.
Oh, okay. Let me got it. Okay.
So what she's talking about in this article is that people have studied everything about the West.
Okay.
That you can think of. They've studied the music, they've studied the movies, they've studied the sculpture, they've studied the paintings, right?
Yeah.
But we have this genre of fiction called the Western. They're books, they're stories, okay? And they usually focus on men, okay? Doing what we typically think of as traditional male things, hunting, fishing, they what do I want to say? They herd cattle, those kinds of like male things that happen, right? And if there's females in the books, there usually are, they are usually in sort of one of two camps. Either they're the perfect wife and like the perfect specimen, right? The princess, or sometimes they're the woman in distress kind of thing, right? Or they're like the prostitute, right? So you've got this very kind of dichotomous idea that goes on. So now about this reading trick, and I'm going to show you this because this is a trick that I showed Paulina. When you have to read an article and you don't have time to read the whole article and you want to figure out. Now, a lot of these articles have an abstract. This doesn't, okay? It has parts. But what I would suggest that you do, if there's an abstract, you read that. Here, I would suggest you read the whole first paragraph first, just to get an idea of, this will give you an idea of where it's going. You want an idea of what is this person saying about whatever they're talking about, okay? So it says, in recent years, virtually every art form dealing with the American West has become fashionable, profitable, and therefore to some extent respectable. Every art form, that is, except fiction. Most novels and short stories about the West are still regarded as severely pulp trash, widely read but rarely taken seriously. Pulp fiction it's not just the movie, okay? It's a term in English. Pulp fiction or pulp novels refers to, novels are written on paper. Paper's made from trees, right? And the pulp is the stuff that's left over after you make the wood. Like the leftover refuse wood stuff, wood pulp, right? Pulp fiction, it's the idea that these books kind of aren't worth the paper they're written on. They're kind of, they're nice as an escapist and you read it, but they're just trash. They're just trash. So pulp fiction is kind of like that, okay? Widely read, so a lot of people read them, widely read, but rarely taken seriously.
Okay.
PhD candidates have written dissertations on Western music, films, sculpture, and painting, but the fiction still limps along on the critical and academic backlist, lower than women's studies or science fiction. I propose that a significant reason for this respectability gap, as it might be styled, is that unlike other art forms taking the American West as their source or subject, the fiction has, for the most part, stayed at the simplistic level of its dime store origins. Okay, so this means that, like, probably when your parents were children or young people, right? We had, at least in the United States, we had these stores where you could buy stuff for a dime. This is when your salary was maybe 30 or 40 cents and your whole salary would be a few dollars, you know what I mean? But this is when you had buying power. So a dime store, you could buy these novels for a dime, literally. And they were like the cheap versions, and people would read them. Kids would read them, but adults would read them. They were a dime store novels. Originally, and its early popularizers, people who wrote, they specifically specialized in this genre of Western dime store novel. Owen Winster, Zane Grey, and other people. Zane Grey is a very well-known Western author. They're very formulaic Westerns. They're about men go fight in the elements, go whatever, especially in characterization. So they don't have that deep a character. And therefore, because of this simplistic level that these Western novels have not kind of left, therefore, they fail to take into account the complexities both of human behavior, actual human behavior or fictional human behavior, and of the Western's own genre, the romance. So romance grew from that, okay? Now, I would probably go ahead and read this second paragraph, but you have an idea of what the article is going to be about.
Right.
Okay. An important manifestation of Western fiction's arrested development occurs in its treatment of women characters. So again, now this is where her feminist ties are going to come in. So she's going to talk about how women are treated, right? Even the best of recent fiction about or based on myths of the West. And so this is an author, Thomas Burgers. This is his book, Little Big Man. Okay. Ken Kesey, he's an author. Here's the book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This was also a movie. Okay. Has generally continued to perpetuate a puerile or an idiotic or a stupid fantasy. Okay. Childish, right? By males, about males, for males. So basically she's saying this Western genre is written by men, white men at that, okay? They're written generally for other men. Women can read them, but it's not something, women are usually not interested in hunting and fishing and bears and Indians and the frontier and all of that, okay? But that's what these tend to focus on. So they're by men, written for men, and they have male characters in them. So it's all male, okay? That has restricted most such novels that she's talking about to a realm of escapism in which these names here are main characters in famous Western novels. Hawkeye, Shane is a very, Shane is a title character of a Western novel by the same name, and there was a series featuring him. So Hawkeye, Shane, or Hood, these guys are like main characters, different novels. Grows solitarily gray, hunting and fishing, building forts, and shooting Indians. This is Indians. This is a slang word here. Happily removed from all adult women forever. Not merely the formulaic pulp novelists. So there's, remember, Pulp Fiction refers to these novels that are considered trash, right? Here's another novelist, Louis L'Amour. So Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey are two of the most famous Western authors in the US. If you go anywhere on the internet, if you want to read a Western, start with Louis L'Amour, start with Zane Grey, mention that to anybody that knows anything about Westerns, they'll know who you're talking about. But often the most respected of Western writers still manufacture the same dreary female stereotypes as Winster and Grey. So even if you get somebody who's more respected, you still get dreary females, okay? And these types, so they manufacture the same dreary female stereotypes as Winster and Grey did. Types who are by no means confined to fiction about cowboys and Indians, but who appear in some form in virtually all literature. So these kind of stunted females appear everywhere, okay? The basic division of women into the purely good and the utterly bad, the virgin and the bitch. Northrop Frye's The Lady of Duty and the Lady of Pleasure, the Princess and the Poison Queen.
True.
Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and read the rest of the, but I'm going to show you what trick, because I said I would show you this.
Yes.
Okay, so you kind of read so you get an idea of where the article is going. You need that. Then what you do is you read, let me get my spotlight. You read the first sentence, sometimes the first two, depending on, like sometimes it's a transition sentence and you need to, but read the first sentence and the last sentence of a paragraph.
Oh, okay.
So, but simply to identify such characterization, what characterization are they talking about? The characterization of this dichotomy. You have the good lady or the bad lady, basically. There's no in between. Simply to identify such characterization as shallow or to disparage it as merely another form of male chauvinism is to overlook more salient, more important consequences in favor of an equivalently simplistic revisionist feminist attack. So it's too simple, is what she's saying. Now jump down here, find your last sentence or the last two.
I believe is examination of two further. Oh, more important,
I believe, is the examination of two further consequences arising from such limited characterization. She's talking about that. Okay. Limited characterization in Westerns. What are they? The basic dynamics of romance are aborted in these novels. There's women and men connecting, but there's no romance, which is not realistic. They just abort all that. Okay. And therefore, most fiction of the American West has never allowed itself to explore and develop. So she's going to have something to say about women and the placement of it. Now go here and do the same thing. Doubtless, one of the reasons that much Western fiction remains at West a problematic genre for critics is that the West itself is still ordinarily seen by many who live there as an uneasy mixture of mythic fantasy and social inertia. So it's a fantasy and it just kind of stops, okay? Now this second sentence, normally I wouldn't bring it up, but there's a cultural thing in here that you need to know. And I know because I read it. The region itself, talking about the West, is vague, uncertainly located somewhere over the Mississippi and south of Philadelphia. So let me show you this, because this will help you. Here it goes. Okay, yeah, I'm sharing that screen. So that's good. I want to share this. So here's the Mississippi River. Okay. It's right in the middle of the country, goes through part of Texas, all the way through Kansas City, Missouri, all the way up to almost Canada, almost here. So she's talking about over the Mississippi, okay, and west of Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia is in Pennsylvania over here. So this is Pittsburgh. Philadelphia is not on this map, but she's saying south of Philadelphia.
Okay.
Right? South of Philadelphia, but over the Mississippi. So this area that's south of Philadelphia. So if you figure like somewhere here, right? And over the Mississippi. So we're talking about on this side because we want to be in the West. So you're looking at this part.
Okay.
You're talking about this piece. Wyoming, California, part of California is part of that. Part of Oklahoma, that kind of thing, all that. That whole area is the West we're talking about. So it's huge. And even parts of some Westerns have some parts of Canada there. Okay, but she's talking. So I usually think of like California, Wyoming,
Right.
Nebraska, right? The Midwest. It's a huge place, okay? But this is just for context.
Okay.
That's what she's talking about.
Okay.
That, and I, like I said, it's not a big deal, but being that that was, being that that was mentioned, I was like, I need to mention that so that it's, it is in there for you. So, okay, so it's basically, it's this kind of a problematic place, right? And then she goes into talking about what's in it and all the, like the cultural things that are in there. Okay. Talks about the trucks and the boots and all that. And then she says, now here, this is a but. So I would probably back up to the sentence before that and say, the same schizoid, and in this case, she's talking about like a split response, appears toward art about the West. So again, she's talking about how there's this division, artificial, right? Dismissed by most critics as regional sentimentalism. So people who live in the West are sentimental for the West, and people who don't aren't. Which only the proletariat, remember this is the working class, favor, presumably moving their lips and stroking their Winchesters. This is a type of old rifle, okay? Stroking their old rifles all the while, but suddenly Wall Street brokers are wearing Justin boots, okay? Another cultural reference. Justin boots, I had to look this one up, okay? Justin boots are a type of cowboy boots. They were manufactured by Justin, who was a famous manufacturer. They're made for horseback riding and equestrian. So this is a type of cowboy boot. And I did somewhere here, let me see. Here we go. I pulled up the image for Justin boots. So you can look at, I don't think, oh, they don't give you an image on this one. Let me look at, but these are, let me give you the image because a picture in this. So Justin boots look something like this. So they have the long toe because you don't want to get stepped on by a horse or something, you know. But some of them zip, some of them don't, but they're long form boots and they're high. Okay. Different heights, some of them calf, some of them knee, depending on, you know, where you are, but that's what it's talking about. So again, the point of this is that people have this dichotomistic response. So she's actually laying out an argument here, but she hasn't said a whole lot yet, okay? But now, okay, so it says, now we're down here, where it says, Western fiction has earned its lack of status, however, for most of it is still as limited as it was 70 years ago. A striking contrast with what is happening in the other arts about the West. Okay, so basically, like, it's this way because it's decided to stay like this. It just hasn't grown. It just hasn't, she says. And I'm sure she's going to give us reasons, but we don't have time to read all that. Okay, so we're going to come down here. Now, in this paragraph, she talks about it's limited as much as it was 70 years ago. And at the end of this paragraph, she starts talking about a few other female stereotypes are changing. So she's talking about the stereotypes of all the music. This is a lot. If you want a cultural education, Irma, you read this paragraph and you look up all these references, okay? There's a lot of songs in here, and they're stated as such, okay? And it gives you the artists and it gives you the songs. The point
Yeah,
of this,
I'm not familiar with any of those names.
so the point of this is that a lot of Western music focuses on alcohol use or sexual promiscuity or like being in prison. So you get things like don't there's David Allan Coe's song about being drunk. And then
Okay.
there's Jerry Walker's Up Against the Wall, Redneck Mother, right?
Mhm.
And then you've got Roy Acuff and the Carter family, who were they lived in the hills and the backwoods, and they sang about, the Wabash Cannonball, and they sang about family stuff. And so it's just trying to give you a sense of. Tammy Wynette may be more familiar to you, Tammy Wynette or Loretta Lynn, but they're talking about Loretta Lynn's song, Don't Come Home a-Drinking with Lovin' on Your Mind, which basically is a song to somebody that the narrator in the song was married to him. The narrator of the song is a female. She was married to this guy. He's basically a drunk. Okay, he comes home and he comes home drunk every night. And then when he gets drunk, he gets sloppy. And, sometimes he goes out on the town. He's a womanizer, right? And he comes home and he wants to make love to his wife. It's like, no, thank you. Don't come home thinking that you're going to do that. Okay.
Right.
This paragraph is that it's all about that. And it hasn't grown from that. Okay. But music has grown from here. You still have these songs, but country music, country Western music has grown from all of these. Okay. I grew up on country, so I can understand some of that. It says no equivalent transformations like the ones that are happening in music and other genres. See, so you don't even have to understand all that to understand her point. You see where I'm going with this? You understand the point she's making, right? Without necessarily now, if you understood all that and wanted to analyze all that, that's great. You don't need to do that. No equivalent transformations are occurring in Western fiction, which for the most part still gives us shallow demi-types, like half types. They're sort of halfway developed types of no complexity. So these are your airheaded versions with the, they're maybe these are smart women, but we don't know that because they're not characterized like that. Okay. Now you might want to read the next sentence, but it's a repeat, not even stereotypes, much less archetypes. Most Western women are characters so formulaic, so diluted, and so single dimensional that their functions are usually as interchangeable as assembly line carburetors. In other words, they come out the same all the time. Then she goes into a bunch of examples of that. If you wanted to pull examples from your essay, you could. But again, go to the end. Now here, this is not going to make sense to you, this last sentence, until you read the sentence before that. So you say, it talks about, so these are some people that were
Susan and Barrett's.
Barrett struggles to come to terms with the frontier, form an essential part of the work. That's what, so these are more authors, right? And they didn't have, so they don't have, they have exceptional creations. So there are a few, is what this means. There were a few authors who sort of went beyond it. Much more common, she says, next paragraph, much more common are the legions, the huge numbers of faceless women who service, follow, or prompt the men. These are the women who serve the men, right? Motivators, not actors, important only to the plot, which is primarily concerned with what? The maneuverings of males. As I told you, they're talking about males. So then she goes into, there's a list, right? There's a whole list of school teacher. There's a whole list of who did what to who. And then it says, who can name more than a few of the main female characters in these novels that were listed? If you've read any of these, who can name more than a few? Not too many. And these are not the pulps. Okay. These are the ones that are not considered pulp. These are the ones that are taken more seriously. But even here, who knows who's in them? Right? We don't know that. We don't know who's in them. But the good books among the best in Western writing. Okay, keep going. On the whole, the good demi-types. So we do get some good women, and most of them on the whole are no more distinguishable from one another. Like they all look the same. They're all the same. Then are Isidore the Elder and Isidore Whitehands in Tristan. Again, these are two characters from another novel that I haven't read. Missed that one, Irma, sorry. Curiously, neither are the bad demi-types. So the bad ones are no better. Like we can't even name the bad ones either. Even though their naughty women are ordinarily more distinctive since they cause more trouble, their comparatively greater freedom of action makes them more of a threat than are the dutiful ladies. So we would expect to be able to name more bad women, and we can't. Okay. And then she names some down here. Okay. So it says sometimes she is a literal felon. Okay, like Cat Ballou or Ezra Place. Sometimes a perverse earth mother like Ma Greer, but most popularly she is the soiled dove, isn't Schaefer. So these are some of the other ones, but again, we can't name them. The point is, you don't have to know, and I don't know who all these are. Okay, I know the difference between the books and the authors, but I don't know all these characters. Okay, the point is, even the bad girls, we should be able to distinguish because they tend to be more thought out and they tend to be less similar. We can't even name that. Okay, that's her point. So now she says, now contrast these indistinguishable figures, the ones that we can't sort of distinguish from each other, with the full-blooded archetypes with which most Western women are all but featureless copies. The good woman can be identified in Jungian terms, she's talking about Carl Jung, as the beneficent anima, the soul mother objectified as a goddess adored from afar. And she gives you examples. Okay, let's go down to the bottom and say, let's look at this here. So it says, her encouragement of the hero's sensuality can doom him, the main character, unless he establishes his dominance over her and over these impulses in himself, which she represents. So this woman is like, you need to tame your impulses, right? And if the man does it, he's going to succeed. If he doesn't, he's going to fail. For if he does not defang her, because women are the seductresses, they're the serpents, right? With his magical symbolic weapon, he cannot go on to save the world in the name of righteousness. Okay. So this is kind of how she's setting it up. Do you see kind of where this is going?
Yes.
Given these 2 points of comparison. So we've got the small number of exceptions. So we've got the women, the good women who are not distinguishable from each other because they're just flat types. And then even the bad women are not distinctive enough for us to remember who's who, right? Given these 2 points of comparison, the small number of exceptional female characters in Westerns and the romance myth archetypes on which Westerns draw, the trail of flattened women in most Western fiction is faint indeed. If you go looking for Western women who stand out, it's really hard to find them. Okay. Now, in this case, I would probably read another sentence. The paradox is that the vehicle of romance by which these demi-types are carried to readers is potentially quite powerful, but not if it is limited by internal constraints. So this would be a powerful device, she's saying, if it didn't have all these limits on it, and if it would grow as a form, but it doesn't. Okay. Then she goes into something that would be more familiar to you probably. Let me see. Were many readers of Westerns, especially of the pulps, believe that these novels are most telling in the literal truth, as if they were honest to God historical studies about the way the West really was, including the way men and women really were in the West, and possibly should be still. By appealing to this kind of search for affirmable bias. So people who look at Westerns are looking to affirm what they already believe about the West, okay? This is affirmation bias. And by fixing characteral truths at the level of Barbie and Ken dolls, again, another cultural reference. She's saying that we fix these truths and it's like they're just caricatures. They're Barbie and Ken. Do you know who Barbie and Ken are? Okay, I figured that one would be more familiar to you.
Oh yeah.
This sort of flat and sort of, yeah, just all American, right? Most Western novels have left unexplored what? The non-literal, ambivalent, but nevertheless far more powerful truths of their own origins and romance. So Westerns actually started in romance, is what she's going to say. So she hasn't gotten to her point about romance yet, but she's made this point that like Westerns haven't grown and that culture is part of this whole exchange, right? So again, we do our whole thing. Even the most conventional Westerns rest on a foundation of romance mythology that can sometimes elevate novels above the level of formula. So sometimes they make it past formula.
Right.
They actually get into something original. Both received and created about the nature of America or the West, of good and evil, of solitude and solidarity, of heroism and salvation, of savagery and civilization, and of men and women. Okay. Okay. So sometimes all of that is all about the contrast, and sometimes they make it past that. Okay. The Western, as we know, is ordinarily located in some region in the West. Okay, blah, blah. And we know that. And this is not one whole sentence, right? Like all romances too, the Western is usually stripped of mundane concern. So it's all about the action of the moment. Like nothing, nobody ever goes to the bathroom. Nobody ever stubs their toe, right? You always hear about, okay. So she's saying you don't get the hemorrhoids in pregnant women. You don't get the excise taxes that the hero would have to pay. So there's not a lot of reality to it.
Right. Okay.
Deliverance, the romance Western's hero's principal duty, right? Because he's supposed to rescue the damsel, right? Can be subdivided into two related and sequential. Now, in this case, I would read them so I know what they are. Here, I need to read the second sentence so I know what they are. First, the hero must confront evil, usually by undertaking an arduous journey. And then, he slays the dragon, he rescues the princess, whatever. His second task is to return to the community. So you confront evil, you return. Okay. The point here, jumping to this, you see what I'm doing with this? I'm reading enough to get the point, but I'm not reading everything.
Right.
But this is my strategy, first and last. Unless the first tells me I'm going to tell you two things, you need to read the next sentence to figure out what they are. You know what I mean? The point here is that in order to carry out this two-stage process, you deliver by going on this quest, this journey, this thing, and then you have to come back and return. After you, slay the enemy, kill the dragon, whatever you do, you come back. Any hero of romance, and therefore of a Western, so she's showing how they're connected, must accept and conquer various initiating challenges which prepare him for the task ahead. Well, we said that already, okay? Now, you have to kind of go back a little bit here. Campbell is an author. I'm pretty sure this is going to be Joseph Campbell. Yeah, it is. At this point, says Campbell, she's quoting somebody, the hero will have achieved total mastery of life, for the woman is life. The hero is its knower and master. Because again, the man is master of the woman and the woman is the seductress kind of thing. Suppose, however, the bottom here, right here. Suppose, however, that the hero cannot or will not attempt that confrontation, assimilation, and mastery. Then he has 3 less acceptable choices, okay? He may project his lack of fulfillment. And then he goes into that, and there's this long paragraph about it, right? That's one thing. He may project his lack of fulfillment. And it talks about an example of that in there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This attitude is worse, et cetera, et cetera. He becomes vulnerable, okay? And the second, the hero can take the opposite track and deny his fear and rage about his own reluctance to encounter the goddess he projects. So he can give in, he can project his lack of fulfillment onto women. So it's the woman's fault.
Right.
Right? Or he can rage about it. He can take the opposite track. He can deny his fear and rage. He projects an overcompensatory reversal, and he now sees her as his antithesis. Okay. And then he says there's a third. So then you get to, we go to the second attitude, and she talks about how much worse it is than this, and so on and so forth. And this is the third part of this. And then here, the hero's awe, then you have the awe around women that you have here, stems from the throttled rage, okay? Sadly, this is what's happened to most fiction about the West. Hugely and deservedly popular, wonderfully ironic, blah, blah. Okay, still avoid confrontation. They still avoid confrontation. And then she goes into Cassie's novel. By Cassie, she's talking about Ken Cassie. She's talking about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Okay. Cassie's novel is marvelously complex anticipation. Now, here, if you were actually going to read this, you might need to know a tad about the novel. Okay. Basically, it's about this, the movie, because I saw the movie, I didn't read the book. The movie's about this man who's a criminal, right?
Okay.
And he's gonna go to prison. He doesn't want to go to prison. So he gets this idea that he's going to pretend to be crazy. And he actually manages in the movie, I don't know if the book is exactly the same, but he manages to not completely probably convince a psychiatrist that he's mentally unstable, but enough to where the psychiatrist believes that he is unstable, right? And his thing is he wants to go in there, get in there, and avoid prison by going to the mental institution, right? Thinking that when he gets better, like he can get better while he's in there and then get out, right? Well, he gets into this institution and it's kind of the whole stereotypical institution, but it's got this nurse, at least it has this nurse. Her name is Nurse Ratched. And she is she's a bitch, okay? Like she's dealing with all these neurotic people and all these people who, I mean, some of them are really unstable, but some of them are not. Some of them are just overly neurotic.
Mhm.
And it's like, you're going to take your medication and but she's very like, on the outside, she's very, this is what I do, and I'm very professional, but she's very much like, you will do this. And like, they try to ask her for stuff and she's like, no, you can't do that. So she's really like, she restricts a lot of their freedom. Basically, his whole plan goes out the window, but he starts planning these elaborate like things. He noticed like people are just, they're zonked out on medication, or they're just like, they've given up. They've been there for ages. And he starts like instigating a bunch of stuff, right? So they start trying to give him medication, and he starts planning an escape with some of them, and that's kind of the whole deal, right? And at the end of it, like there's a scene where they don't manage, some of them manage to get out, but there's a scene where there's this one guy that's been in there, he's a mute, and he's a mute Indian man. And he is like the biggest one, and he actually develops the biggest friendship with this guy. And rather than the movie, the gentleman who is sick. So here's the psychiatrist. So here, insanity is not the only sane reaction to a universe gone mad. At the end of the movie, the protagonist, the guy that pretends to be crazy, ends up getting the other guy to smother him because he can't get out. He can't get out, and he realizes that he's gonna be stuck there, and he would rather not. So the guy, rather than see his friend go through that, they have a whole, it's an interesting, it's disturbing. Not in the same way that a horror movie would be, but you're watching it going, what the hell? Like, it's worth watching. I had to watch it. One of my students had an assignment about it. But this is a whole description. This is a whole description of the Indians, the Lone Ranger, some of the characters in here, right? Big Nurse is the other, right? This is some of the characters. And then it talks about, despite her status as the hero's opponent, and therefore despite the necessity of her individualization as part of Kessie's Hegelian argument that insanity is like the only good response to insanity is it's not, it's insanity around here, right? And then it talks about the treatment. So this talks about the differential. This is a description of the differential treatment and how this works. And hers is basically a one-dimensional evil, talking about Nurse Ratched. For her power is largely derivative, not something she has earned. She merely symbolizes the impersonality of power, because they're basically keeping these guys, these people in control with medication.
Right.
Consequently, when McMurphy, who's the criminal, attacks her, he attacks Rashid. His act is primarily political, a defiant, trust-busting assault on the combine she represents. The chief, who's the mute Indian, recognizes the political nature. When using Western formula terms, he describes McMurphy's responsibilities. We couldn't stop him because we were the ones making him do it. Because he was motivated to help them. So this is kind of a description of that. So she's showing how this works. She does the same thing. It says, in demonstrating that the Western paradise no longer exists, Cassie shows the danger of imposing any single perspective onto reality. Okay, so more about the book. More about how that, so the original Western print, now this is a different book. Okay. The original Western Princess Molly Wood is spunky, so her innocence and her virginity. the sine qua non, the original name of the princesshood is of queenhood, and so you get this symbol of the queenhood. So you get a discussion of that book. Okay. And so she says, thus, what these two represent is approximately Mali represented, but the concept of civilization that the two books examine, okay, talking about the two books that she just discussed. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and the other book, which I think was The Princess Bride, I think. I can't remember. Or the Virgin, I'm not sure. It could be the Virginian, but the two books examine has degenerated considerably. So this whole Western, that's degenerated. It's not there anymore. Okay. And it says that they stand for something powerful, thinned out to silliness. Rather, it is both that Winster and Berger portray civilization as approximately equivalent to manners, gentility, fashion, behaviors to be studied, rather than ethics to be learned. In short, trivialities women are well suited to symbolize, as big nurse symbolized an equivalently shallow evil. Once understood, the evil is overcome as easily as the useless good. Okay, so then she goes back to the novel she was talking about, The Virginian, Cuckoo's Nest, that's the Cassie novel, and Little Big Man, that's Berger's novel, the fountainhead of Westerns, and two of the best. The women are significant in catalytic, supportive fashion, but not as characters. They are props in front of whom the men may strut or snarl, but from whom little independent action is expected or required. So again, shallow, right? Should the usual Western hero fall in love, and particularly should he marry any woman but an Indian, he is automatically removed from the action. So again, that is to say, like most protagonists of heroic literature, the Westerner is typically unmarried and earns respect in the eyes of other would-be heroes through his self-sufficiency and expertise with the weapons of his trade. So he's really meant to be like a loner type, right? His discomfort is also a symbol of his own or his creators or readers' repressed fears about himself, fears too alarming ever to be consciously acknowledged and therefore impossible to overcome, because nobody admits the fears are real. But it is not a homosexual panic at all. It's not, she's not saying that it's this homosexual like fetish and we're afraid of homosexuals. It is an asexual panic, a terror at the possibility of any kind of emotional sexuality lurking anywhere. Sexuality as a whole is not present. Like it's present, but it's not. That's what she's saying here. A Western hero might get his ashes hauled in Dodge City if the book were written after 1950, but a committed and loving attachment is usually not only beyond his ken, but his impulses.
Right.
He doesn't, that's not in his vocabulary, right? The bulk of fiction about the American West often does something virtually unparalleled in romance. It celebrates the divorce of psychosexual maturation from growth, heroism, and ultimate salvation. So when you mature psychosexually, you don't become any better. And then she gives examples of that. Okay. Translated into ritual terms, Fry writes, the quest romance is the very victory of fertility over the wasteland, but the Western romance is designed precisely to keep fertility at bay. The Western version has little or nothing to do with rejuvenation or civilization. And like Natty Bumppo, that's a character, its hero becomes attenuated, even dangerous. So this literary West, this American version of Avalon, the Hesperides, the Isle of Cockaigne, is a dry land in more ways than one. For in order to keep his own narrow myth of autonomy intact, the Western hero has been forced to refuse the responsibility of furthering the community's needs and is thereby niggardly withheld, like he's stubborn, he's stringent about it. Withheld fulfillment not only from himself, but from the barren land. Constrained in his quest even before he begins by his inability to accept the most frightening challenge of all, the typical Western protagonist has neglected his best chance of saving his soul and encasing eternity in his mortal lifetime. As a hero, he has been sold short because he has not been allowed to take the one risk that can bring him true salvationary nature, the risk of losing his soul, not to a princess or a poison queen, so not to one of these caricatures, but to a woman. Never done it. Okay. So you get the point that she's making here. And see, you didn't have to. Now it's slower for you because it's the first time